Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. At this point, I usually introduce who I'm going to speak to this week. I've introduced over 120 different CX experts in interviews on this podcast so far, and there will be more, but I'm going to test out a new idea this week. I'm going to speak. It's just me. Sometimes there are issues that I'd like to talk about, and I can address them by talking to my guests and asking particular questions. But as it's my podcast and it's one of the most popular CX podcasts globally, I guess it's okay to take over my own show now and again. So this week you just have me. Let me know what you think. Next week I'm going to return to the interview format, but let's just try this and see what happens. I'd like to talk about cities, change, and our recent experience with the COVID-19 pandemic. Why do CX companies see that change is essential, yet most of the economy and the politicians seem to believe that we will soon see a return to normal? Okay, let's go then. Change is difficult. We all know that. There is an entire field of psychology devoted just to studying organizations and how change can be managed successfully. As we know from our recent experience with the COVID-19 coronavirus, the quickest way to change is to have no alternative, the burning deck. When every company in the customer service industry sent their agents home, it became the biggest ever global test of the work-at-home agent model. And it worked. Teleperformance had around 10,000 work-from-home agents at the start of this crisis, and now they have over 200,000. I also haven't heard of any data security disasters from any of the major BPOs, so it can clearly be argued that using work-from-home agents has been proven to be safe. Now, McKinsey has suggested that any company that wants to build customer experience resilience for next year will have to build a blended solution, which means splitting the customer service team across multiple contact centers, multiple countries, and always having a proportion working from home. And that proportion is going to vary. Some clients may be happy to be 100% work from home agents, and some will want to only have the work from home element as insurance against a future problem. I mean, perhaps COVID-20 will arrive as soon as we get a vaccine for COVID-19. But one of the biggest news stories in the European media recently has been how the people in office-based jobs across all industries are continuing to work from home, even though their governments are saying it's safe to go to the office again. It's as if these workers who spent years asking for an improved work-life balance are actually enjoying that they now have it. The British government, for example, they're almost begging people to return to the office, saying that the workers have a duty to support the businesses that rely on those office workers. Just this week, the sandwich chain Pret a Manger, they announced store closures and that they're firing a third of all their employees. The British government's also hinted that those staying at home might be damaging their own job security. It actually sounds like they're arguing for a return to presenteeism, where the most valuable people are those putting in the hours, rather than focusing on the delivery and the output. Now, it strikes me as odd to hear national leaders talking about a return to normal. We know that consumer behaviour has changed. All those people who discovered e-commerce because they were forced to order online during the lockdown are not going to go back to the shopping malls. I've used Amazon myself for years, since the 1990s. But even I found that I was ordering things online that I'd usually buy in person. And I know I'm not going to go back to searching stores for the products I can find in seconds on my phone. Nobody really knows where the chips are going to fall with this. President Trump is promising a vaccine for COVID-19 before the end of the year, but we all know that he has to make a pitch like this because it's an election year. If you actually read what the drug companies and scientists are saying, then it's clear that even if a vaccine is discovered in the next few months, it might take 18 months to ramp up the production. So Harvard University has actually advised that social distancing will be essential throughout 2021 and 22. So are you planning how your customers are going to behave when we realize that masks and social distancing are not temporary? It's clear that entire cities are going to need to adapt to this. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, Sir Christopher Wren designed new churches and new buildings that are very famous now. St. Paul's Cathedral, the Royal Observatory and the Monument. London completely changed. But the city's seen wave after wave of change. You could look at the embankment changing the course of the River Thames in the 19th century, and the 1930s slum clearances are just a couple of good examples. Look at Paris. From 1853 to 70, Baron Haussmann, he tore down entire neighbourhoods in Paris and constructed these vast open boulevards. One in central Paris has now got his name on it. New sewers, new aqueducts were built, and the entire map of Paris changed. In 1890, there was so much horse dung on the streets of New York City that it was predicted that by 1920, people would be wading through streets knee-deep in dung. Of course, Henry Ford changed all of that. It's worth noting that many of these changes to cities were initially driven by diseases such as cholera. Without the effective sewage systems that were only really built in the 19th century, it was hard to access clean drinking water. It was usually safer to only drink beer because the alcohol helped to sterilize the drink, and that sounds pretty good actually, a nice beer with breakfast. Now the cities that we know and love will have to change again. The work from home experiment that was forced on every company because of the pandemic has demonstrated that most people can work safely from home and their productivity actually increases. Of course, this isn't true for everyone. Those caring for kids or relatives or those in cramped accommodation do need a separate workplace. But this leads us to the blended workplace situation that's already being designed by most customer service companies. The big players like Sykes and Teleperformance, for example, I'm sure that they are now designing solutions that allow agents who want to stay at home to be able to stay at home. And then those who need a workplace will be able to use a contact center. But maybe those contact centers in future are going to change and we'll see a larger number of small centers scattered throughout cities rather than the big aircraft hangars with thousands of seats that we're used to. Companies like Live Exchange are suggesting that gig CX is the way to go, using the gig economy model, discard the contact center entirely and use cloud-based software to create virtual contact centers that's staffed by agents, all working from home. It's an attractive idea because it finally answers the Black Friday problem of seasonality. How do you scale up your team by 300% just for 2 weeks? And just today I spoke to the team at Transcom, really just before recording this podcast, and they're now promoting an interesting kind of middle way. They have agents that can be working at home or the contact center, but importantly, they're trained to work for several different clients. So they can receive customer calls or messages from many different accounts throughout the day. This allows them to bill the client by each engagement rather than paying somebody to work an 8-hour shift, whether they're busy or not. They're calling this their flex model, and it's an interesting idea because it offers the flexibility of gig workers, but the workers are actually kept in-house, so training and quality can be more tightly controlled. There's no question that we're going to see a wave of innovation and digital transformation in CX over the coming year. The work from home experiment has proven more than just the possibility of hiring agents to work from home. It's going to lead to changing employment models like gig CX and a greater focus on domain knowledge. 5CA in the Netherlands is a good example here. They've made a lot of noise about their focus on domain expertise. When they hire an agent to support gamers, the first requirement is that the agent is a gamer, not how much customer service experience they've got. It really looks like the CX community is ahead of many other industries. I mean, why aren't companies like Pret-a-Manger exploring new delivery models? They could be locating stores in the suburbs instead of city centre, offering home delivery, launching self-driving robots that tour neighbourhoods offering coffee and snacks. And it sounds like something from Black Mirror, but Domino's Pizza has been exploring ideas like this for years, and they had self-driving pizza robots 2 years ago. Why are some industries just waiting for everything to get back to normal? It's never going to happen. Nobody can predict when this crisis will end or how it will change customers and companies. But one thing is clear. We're not going back to how customers behaved in 2019. The customer service companies are adapting and innovating because they already understand this. It's time for the rest of the economy and the politicians to catch up with the CX experts.